Hello everyone, hope you all are doing great. I am Preeti, your host for today, and I'm excited to welcome you to this session on building REST APIs with Python and Flask. Now, I am delighted to introduce our speaker, Mr. Yokeshwaran. He is a seasoned software engineer with over 8 years of experience in designing and developing scalable, high performance solutions across diverse domains, including automotive, logistics, and storage. He is highly proficient in leveraging a wide range of technology with a strong focus on Python based tech stacks. We are very excited to have him with us today to walk us through the fundamentals and practical application of building REST APIs using Python and Flask. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Yokeshwaran. Over to you, sir.
Hi, thanks Preeti for the introduction and yeah, good morning everyone. Hope everyone is doing great and thanks for joining. And so apart from what Preeti said about my introduction I have been working with industrial like around 8 years now and I'm associated with Aziro Technologies as a lead engineering. So I do like work on automotive logistics and currently with storage and networking. So in today's session, we'll be actually touching down the fundamental concept. So what is more required when we are about to actually go into a full stack or a backend kind of role. So this is something more needed if at all we are going to actually build a product on scale. So we'll go into the topic probably like let me share my screen. Uh, Hope so my screen is visible.
Yes, it is visible.
Yeah, so this one, right? Probably the APIs. So if at all the APIs is not there, if the concept of APIs doesn't exist, that won't be like many applications what we use today in our day-to-day life or which is being used across various locations, right? Be it quick commerce, e-commerce, or else any application where millions of consumers like pitch in at the same time. So for this one, APIs would be the fundamental foundation thing. So it's important as a backend developer or a full stack developer to know how to actually consume the APIs, how to develop APIs in first, and so on. So it's not limited to any particular platform or tech stack, but here for today's session, we'll actually consider having Python and Flask while we build the APIs. So what we'll be covering in this session is about what is the AP, the RESTful AP in particular, and the features of this, and why we specifically go with Python and Flask for this AP, and how we actually test these APIs once we actually develop it. So testing needs to be there. So how we test these APIs. And additionally, we'll also go with having an hands-on with building a real-time application as a prototype with the employee directory. So we'll actually move on. And here regarding the RESTful API, right? So API in particular, right? It can be RESTful, it can be SOAP. So all these are protocols for an API. But when we say RESTful API, there are certain set of standards or guidelines needs to be followed in developing this such APIs here. And most of the applications what we come across, be it mobile app or web app, RESTful APIs are being used. And it is the starting point for building any application. Okay, if at all you identify this particular app needs to be developed, you first go and write some REST APIs there before you actually diverse into the other set of APIs. So REST API in specifying the definition can be like it's again another API which follows a particular architecture, REST architecture. So REST is like it maintains a state for that each of the API, and it is mainly used across web services when we are doing an interaction between a client and the server. So the benefits of using the REST API is like it's more useful while we are going with scalability. Scalability in the sense is like when multiple millions of users like say Zomato, when millions of uses an app, the scalability is something needs to be considered. So for that, all the REST APIs would be like much handy, and it is actually simple to develop as well as to maintain. So while we build an application, it's not that we have to see on a developer perspective like how simple it's to develop, and as well as on the user perspective, we have to see like how it can be reachable to the audience, and how it can be like making the work pretty much easy there. So it's actually more simple, and there is going to be caching support that's always needed for an API so that you get the recent transactions more faster. And also, like as we said before, it's platform and language independent. That means you can use any language or any platform to develop these APIs. It's not that you can only use Python and Flask, so it can be done in Java or it can be done in Golang, whatever. Yeah, so this is about the benefits of REST API. And so the features, as I said, it's stateless. So what is mean by stateless? So when you say I need to actually order something, okay, if I'm going to an Amazon web application and I'm going to actually go to a category of shoes, right? So in shoes, it's going to actually give an API call for that. And again, in shoes, there would be like n number of shoes listed. And to filter the shoes, again, you are going to give a search for that. So it's there. Two APIs are going to work to bring you this particular screen which you are interested in. So for this two particular APIs, though both of the APIs are running in the same application, both are stateless. So when I mean stateless, is like each of the API endpoints for that particular request, it needs its separate authentication token for that. So that's stateless. So it doesn't actually carry the credential information, the session information, whatever. So every new request is considered as an every new approach to that application. So it's more used when we use the client server architecture. So client server architecture in the sense these APIs are being used from any UI client, being it React, or you can also use directly from the command line, or you can use that API with another API. So you can consume it as a third-party API. So that those are going to be the client. Whereas in the server, it's where that our API is being built, and it's where it's running. So this client server architecture is the main maybe like all the REST APIs which is developed would be based on this client server architecture. And the uniform interface. So the uniform interface, when we see probably like not all the REST APIs would be like scattered here and there. It would have a standard to define the REST API names, these API signatures, what we used to call. So everything it would be like there is a standard for defining that REST API. So we actually always make tend to make that consistent. If you are going to develop an employee directory, have the employee signature or have that employee string in all of your API endpoints there within that application. So that's an uniform interface there. And you also make use of the HTTP methods. So the normal CRUD operations, what we use to say, the create, retrieve, update, and delete. So these are like the inbuilt methods. What's been used for these HTTP methods, and it's actually resource based. When we say resource based, it either uses like say for example you need to upload a file in your application. You need to upload your Aadhaar card in some web app. So that actually takes your Aadhaar card file as a payload. That is an input payload for your API. So, and it consumes that particular file, and that file would be like transmitted to an intermittent format. And then at the server side, it would be actually cascaded to either a database or to a file object storage system, whatever. So those are like, it's always a resource based. It can be a file for which I said an example, or it can be like you fill a form and you click on submit. So when you fill a form and you click on submit, it's like you actually give a data in some specific format, and on clicking submit, it would be directly going into the server side there. So that's all resource based, and this resource can be media content or a JSON content or an XML kind of format, whatever that. And the stateless communication. So stateless, when I say, it's again referring to the first point. Each of the client requests, right? So each of the client request is independent. So when I say independent, when two of your friends access the same application at the same time, your credentials goes with that API request, and the other's credentials goes with a separate API request. So they are isolated there, so there is no correlation between this request. So that actually maintains the stateless architecture for this one. So these are like the features why we go with REST API in particular. So here for our maybe like for our use case, why we go with Flask and Python. So that's been mentioned because as if anyone are like familiar with Python, or do have fundamental or moderate mid-level knowledge in Python, they would be like very well knowing about the Python features compared to the other languages, because Python itself comes with a large library architecture. Since it's an open community where you can actually contribute to that, as well as you can consume from that community, it comes with large library, so that it can be very well integrated to any particular application. So that's been used here, and it's cross platform. So Python as a language, right, it's an interpreter language. So whatever question you ask to Python, it just actually gives you the answer in quick. But how a language can be interpreted, so where the memories get allocated, and where the memory management is done, and how the data structures are being maintained in the memory, all those actually like can't be handled in an interpreter language, because interpreter language talks on an application level, not at the firmware level. Firmware, when I say, at the microcontroller or the chip level, microprocessor level. So for any particular language to work on, or where the language actually reserves a memory, you need a compiler for that. So Python by itself as a compiler, but maybe like the end developers, as all we won't be knowing much about the compilers, because Python would be using a compiler in a form of C, or else in form of Java. So that's what's been like currently we are working with. So all the versions of Python, it can be either C plus Python or Java plus Python. So it's actually designed, all these memory management as well as the garbage collection, everything is being handled by the compilers underneath, so that the Python's work is just to interpret whatever the human readable code into the machine understanding language, so that it's actually cross platform oriented. And while we actually go on to Flask, right, so why we actually need to adapt Flask is, so for any prototyping, so for quickly writing any particular web app POC, we would go with Flask, because on a large scale, Flask could be like having some performance bottlenecks. But to start with the prototype or to start with POCs, Flask could be a better option. So that's, it's lightweight, and it's a micro framework. So micro framework in the sense you can use Flask while creating multiple microservices. So it's also easy to build REST APIs. So compared to the other frameworks, Flask is more handy while bringing in REST APIs, and Flask by itself has many plugins which actually like helps in integrating the database, or else like integrating any authentication mechanism, as well as like integrating any particular validations, data validations. So you can use all the Flask plugins, which can be extended from the Flask framework. There. And so the other like other frameworks in Python, like Django or FastAPI, it comes with a development server inbuilt as well as an flag to control the debug. And as I said before, it works more handy while doing prototypes and POCs. So that's why we are going to Flask and Python. And yeah, so I'll take a pass here. And is there any question from anyone here?
Yes, sir. Okay, so one question, first question is asked by Suman. How do we achieve scalability in terms of REST APIs?
Okay. So REST API by itself, so REST API is actually a foundation while we actually need a scalable one. So assume like this example, right? It might actually suit this well. A front end, a back end for a web application considers as an kitchen and a dining space. Okay. So at home, when you are actually working, when some recipe is being cooked in kitchen, it's been served immediately to the dining space because the recipe that's considered like a data is not much. So it's going to be like one or two whatever, and they serve it quickly to your plate in dining space. But when you go to an hotel, you need a waiter in between to serve what are the recipes to the dining space. So that's where the API utility comes. API is something like when the data to deal is much more, and when the users are there, many number of users are there to serve, right? At that time, you need an API. You can also directly bridge a network between a backend and a middleware. So you can just integrate an HTML to a backend application directly, but it won't be much scalable. For scalability, you need an APIs, and that API is by itself it won't be scalable. Okay, so you need actually other concepts like asynchronous mechanisms as well as like threadings, multi-processing in case of working with heavy CPU bound tasks. All these you need along with the REST API. So you need everything integrated to achieve the scalability. And the scalability, when we say it's not only limited to how you use an API, it's also bound to the database integration, how you write your queries, or how you actually read your queries from a database. Everything it's actually dependent on. So that all like you'll be getting to know when you put more hands-on along with developing an API to a particular database. So I think this would answer your question.
Yes. Okay. We have so many questions. So let's take one more, then we'll take after some time.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Rishikesh is asking how effectively can we create model in image based API using API built from Python or Flask?
Okay. So image, if I'm understanding it right, you need to consume the image as an payload, right? To assume like this is your use case, you need to upload an image and that needs to be actually saved in some database there. So if at all you want to design this particular use case, you can maybe like to start with an initial version, you would allow a client where you can actually send the image to through this particular API. So it's just like building another API, how you consume a JSON data, and where the actual business logic comes in, like how you interpret that particular image data from a client to the server. So the image is going to be a media content in bytes. So that particular byte, you are going to read it, and then you are going to either load that particular image in any file storage. File storage in the sense you have many file storage, you can directly put it on your Windows Explorer or directly put it on your server, or else a better way would be like having any object storage in terms of if you are using cloud, you can use S3, AWS S3 would be a better option. And once you actually store that in S3, you can just get the metadata of that and store it in your database. Metadata, when I say, it's going to be the location where that particular file is situated. So that particular metadata, you can actually place it in your database. So your API would be designed in such a way that reading that metadata, it would be trying to actually grab that file location from the S3. So
Okay.
that's how it would be actually working. So this is on a higher level architecture. Maybe like you can explore more into an LLD perspective there.
Okay. Let's take another, like, one more question. Rajesh is asking, is Flask better or fast API? Which one to choose and when?
Okay, so fast API is evolving, I would say, and Flask is something like it's already has its footprint in most of the application what's been developed. So since it's evolving, I would say on a production grade, right? It's better to go with Flask. Then, when Fast API framework achieved a certain level of maturity, you can migrate your application to the Fast API. So if at all you are just trying to do a POC, then my suggestion would be differing because to go with Fast API, because Flask is actually initial version, whereas Fast API is an advanced version of Flask, where the performance comes in built, the data validation comes in built, and also like you get the inbuilt docs there. And when you say the concurrency, since the performance comes in built, the concurrency, you don't actually want to take care of more of bottlenecks in terms of handling the threads and actually like leaving the deadlocks, everything. So Fast API by itself can actually take care of that. So I would say if at all you're going with the production grade, so maybe like it would be riskier to build something with Fast API at this time, because Fast API is evolving, and most of the packages for Fast API could actually like needs to evolve, because it might find some bugs in real time, and the creator of those packages has to actually address those bugs. So it's like if you are going to adapt a Fast API, it's always there is going to be some work for you, some maintenance for work for you, even though it's at the production scale then.
Okay. Ashish is asking, fast API and REST API is something similar?
I just lost you pretty in between, but if I get the question right, is Fast API and REST API is something similar, right?
Yes.
Okay. Fast API is actually a framework, whereas REST API is an standard. So maybe like Fast API is something like it limits only to the server side. Okay. So REST API is something like it's an media. Okay. So medium to actually communicate between from a client to a server. So REST API is actually a standard, whereas Fast API is just a framework. It's static, with which you can fast using Fast API you can build a server application, but with using REST API, the use case is beyond that. You are using REST API, you can build the server application and also like use that REST API to communicate with the clients, the number of clients.
Okay. Karthikeyan is asking, is Flask is better than Python?
Mm, yeah, again, so this is kind of an inherited concept. Python is a vast subject, okay? So Python is a language. So Flask is something which is built using that Python language. So Flask, assume like you are going to an office, and there is going to be like some 4 to 5 steps which you are going to carry on a daily routine when you are going to check into your office, right? You log in your system, you connect to your VPN, and you then open certain set of files for a certain set of tasks for you to work on, right? This is always going to be repetitive. So Flask is something like this. So Flask is a template or a framework which always it's going to be there. It's not going to be changing. So on Flask, you can actually build or customize your APIs based on that, REST APIs based on that. So Flask is a template which is built using Python. So Python is a language in specific. So Python is totally of a different use case, and Flask is something built from Python.
Okay. One more question. How can anyone can start career in this field with Python hands-on experience? Can you guide us how, where to learn and use it for non-technical background?
Okay, so maybe like to answer your question, right? So I'm not sure what is the amount of maybe the Python expertise you have, but for developing a prototype or developing anything to step into a backend development, maybe like leave it full stack, just to sticking to a backend development. If at all you are a Python engineer, I would say an moderate amount of knowledge should be fine for that, and you can actually like take some real-time applications like this employee directory application or a to-do application to start with. So for this, basic knowledge of Python should be enough. And what would be more required is like leaving a language like Python. You would need some knowledge on basic computer science concepts like OOPS, and some linear data structure concepts like list, array, and hash maps or dictionaries. And also like you need some database knowledge, all that in moderate level, not at an advanced or an expert level.
Okay, actually we have so many questions. Let's take them after some time.
Okay, sure. Yeah,
Okay,
no issues.
and I would like to request everyone, guys, if you have any question, please write it down in the Q&A tab, so it will be easy for us to take these questions.
Okay, so we move on. So we'll quickly move into like starting to build an employee directory application. So by this way, you will be getting an idea what is Python used for, what is Flask used for, and what is STFA used for, and what is like how you can do better with fast API, everything there. And so this particular application, the scope of this application, what we are developing in this session, it covers the basic, maybe like basic features, like adding an employee to your directory, or retrieving the details of that employee, that particular employee, or retrieving the details of all the employees work, all the employees in your directory available, in specific updating a particular employee's details, or else like deleting that particular employee from your directory. And also like the data validation, I'll actually like explain what is data validation in depth now, and why it is essential for any APIs. Okay. And error handling, so error handling is another vital part while you actually deal with APIs there. Yeah. So the application, this particular application architecture, as I said, it's going to be like dealing with all the CRUD operations, what we do. And as an employee directory, through the APIs, you interact with the server. And this particular server then talks with the database. So for us, we use the SQLite as the database. So SQLite is very lighter database. So in other terms, we can put it as an in-memory store. So when we say in-memory store, it's not like you can use it everywhere. Okay. So this is a database which can be used in that particular host alone, in that particular machine alone. So since I am developing it from here, this database can be used only on my machine. Okay. So this is for a prototype reason. We are going with this in-memory DB, and this is like not advised on an production grade or a scalable architecture, right? For a scalable architecture, the database technology what you're going to use that differs, as well as like the database schema, whether it's going to be a relational database or a non-relational database, everything differs based on your requirements and source. So this is about the architecture of the application. And for the tools which are needed to build this one, right? So you need a Python, maybe like I would suggest a Python with version anything about 3.x. It can be like 3.3 or 3.8. That version, and you need an virtual environment. So for any particular application, right, in Python, leave this particular employee directory. If you're going to use Python for building any application, it's better you build it actually virtually, so that the portability of that application from one machine to cloud or one machine to another machine would be much easier. So what virtual environment does is like, along with only with Python and Flask you can't build an application. Okay, so Flask is a library, a Python library that needs to be installed, and along with Flask you need several other libraries. So all these libraries, if you are going to install, you can't install directly on your machine. Okay, so that actually brings more hitches while you migrate that application to another machine. So for those use cases, or for those better portability, you need a specific isolated virtual environment. So virtual environment is, in sense, it isolates your particular application's environment with your machine's environment. So for that, you need to actually have a virtual environment, and you can acquire that by running pip install virtual env command in your command prompt. And Postman is another specific tools. Why, when you actually have all your APIs implemented in place, then to test all the APIs. Okay, so you might not be having a UI client. Okay, so you don't have to be dependent on a UI client. Once after your server with all your APIs is ready, you can directly test it from a Postman. So I'll be showing how you can test it from a Postman later. And any IDE, so like everyone works, so any IDEs that support Python, right? Or else like even Notepad, that would be better if at all you are an pro guy working in Python then. So this is the tools and the packages needed. And to install the packages, we would be actually running these commands: pip install flask. Okay. So let me actually take my environment setup. Okay, so before going into this, maybe like before going to writing the code, we'll first have the packages and the virtual environment created. So I'll show you maybe how to do it. So this is the terminal which is being opened on my workspace here. So for this, just a minute, so before this, probably like I need to install the virtual environment. So for installing the virtual environment, uh, you need to run this command, pip install virtual environment. Okay, so you will be actually so VNV is the name of the virtual environment what we created for us, and you can see VNV folder created inside this one. And here you will be having the all the packages, whatever you are going to install, all the packages and its dependencies for this. And your terminal should be so if you can see here, your terminal is not with virtual environment. So for your terminal to be within the virtual environment, you need to actually activate the virtual environment space. And here, yeah, we are good to go now. And first we will be installing the Flask. Okay. And once you install Flask or any particular package, it's a better practice in Python to actually get the package details to the requirements.txt. Okay, so here you will be actually having the requirements.txt, and in this you'll see these all the packages and the relevant versions being installed. So what happens is, like, if at all you are going to move this application to another machine, right? You don't have to worry about what is the Python package and the version of that Python package supports to my application, because you have all those details in the requirements.txt, and you can just install this particular requirements.txt directly. Okay. So this is how you start up with any Python project, be it an Flask or whatever the framework related one. So here we'll so I'll just first write down the code, maybe like the initial template of the code, and I'll explain you what is there in each. Okay. So this is how actually you write an API signature within Flask. Okay, for this particular signature syntax is specific only for Flask, but the concept of actually writing any API signature, that's API route, actually is same. So you need a decorator. Decorator is another Python concept. So you need a decorator to write any API signature. Okay, and within the API signature, we will be actually defining. We'll be defining the function, right? Okay. So maybe like I'll just okay. So this is just an maybe like placeholder AP. So to see if our application is good enough to run. Okay, so it's always better. So this is how you run your Flask application. So you initialize your Flask application with this Flask from the Flask module. You import the Flask from the Flask package. You import the Flask module, and then you initialize this Flask to the application, and you run app.run. Without this, your application won't be running. Okay, so without this command. So app.run, and inside this you will be having many flags. For now, since this is a prototype, you will be always having debug flag enabled to true, because since we are at the development stage, in case of any issues, be it an issue from our side or a server issue or a network issue, since the debug flag is true, we will be actually knowing the exact reason for this one. We don't have to actually trace back the reason from the client side. So you'll be actually getting the exact reason if the debug flag is true. So to run this application, okay, so you can see here the debug mode is on, and since the debug mode is on, it states like it's a development server, and it can't be used for production, because in production you can't enable the debug mode. And also in production, along with what we do, you need certain servers to actually host it on a domain. Okay, so you copy this one, and you can see our application is running. Okay, and you will be getting the logs here. So you see the HTTP method get is 200, right? So, and we'll try to put another route. So when I say route, these are the APIs. Okay, so we call it as route, we call it as endpoint, and the APIs. So most of the applications which use REST API, they tend to actually have that particular have their maybe return types, right? Return types for that API routes in terms of JSON, because JSON is an structure which can be like mode passed, right? When I say mode passed, it can be like used. From JSON, you can actually interpret, or you can actually manipulate it to any other formats. Okay, so for those all details, JSON is more handy. So JSON is something like they used to have. So we'll be actually adapting the same JSON. So as I said, Flask comes with its own plugins, right? Which would be making the backend development more easy. So one such plugin is like JSONify. So we will be importing JSONify. Maybe like okay. So what we'll be trying to do, what we'll be doing is like we'll quickly go and create all the endpoints. What are the application needs? So this get is to actually get all the employee details, and this is actually to get the employee what we are interested in by serving the employee ID. So assume I don't want all the employee details. I just want one employee detail in particular. So you will be actually giving that employee ID and retrieving that particular employee details alone. And post is something like to create, add an employee to a directory. So you will be you will be supplying all the employee details, and you will be adding it to the employee directory. And For put, you will be actually for put in the sense you are going to update a specific employee details, right? Assume your employee email ID is changed, or your department employees department is being changed. So to update that particular employee, you don't need all the other employees. So you are going to give that employee ID, and internally this put would retrieve that employee ID details, and it would actually replace it with the details what you are going to update with. And delete, so in specific, if you are going to delete any particular employee, right? So you are going to actually serve that particular employee ID, and you are going to delete it from there. So this is all the APIs what we are going to actually build. And so first we'll create the endpoint templates, and then we'll go with the database integration for this one. So maybe I'll copy paste everything. Okay, so for employee, to get all the employees, you have get, and for getting the specific employee, you need to actually serve the employee ID. So I'm giving the employee ID here, and this employee ID has to go within this particular method. Okay, so you need to refactor this function name, and you need to supply this employee ID here. And again, this is going to be of get method. You are going to retrieve that particular employee detail alone by supplying the employee ID. So maybe like, and then the post method, right? So for post method, you have to change the method here, and the signature would be same for the post method. And make sure you actually have the function names in unique, okay? Because Python doesn't support method overriding. Okay, so you have to have unique function names. Okay, so these are the endpoints what we have identified. So before you build any application, right? So either you are learning, or you are going at a mid level, or you are just going to a production level, right? Before building any application, try to figure out what all the endpoints or the APIs you need, and how that APIs needs to be how that API needs to be done. When I say how that needs to be done, what are the details that needs to be taken, and how it's need to be processed before giving a response. Okay. So it would be like better if you identify all the APIs before you code, okay, before you write coding. So this is the endpoint template which we have. Probably like what we'll do is like we'll go to Postman, and we'll see how to actually test it, all these APIs. Okay, so Postman is something like a testing tool. Okay, so it's an enterprise level testing tool. What most of the API developers used to actually work with. Probably like you can have an web application of Postman installed in your machine, so that it would be like much handy while you test an API what you develop, or else like a third party API. Both you can actually test it with. So this is when Postman, while you open it looks like. Probably we'll try to create an workspace and API development workspace. It will try to have an info that. Okay. So here you will be adding a request. So for us, the initial request is this one, right? So how you would be adding a request is like some of the things to be taken care is add the proper method for that request. Okay. And what is the URL to access this one? Since we don't have an signature after the URL, it's just the signature what we need to give. Okay. So for getting the signature, this is the for getting the port, right? Where our application is running. You can copy this. So you can see the response code as 200. So in backend development standards, right? Everything is in written code, status code. Okay. So 200. We have many standard codes like 200, 201, and even 202. All that says like, okay, your response is correct. It doesn't throw any error, or it's not like crashed. Okay. So you have got the response which is indented. So all these actually says it says okay. So there are like other response code like 404. So what does 404 say is like probably you are having some HTML page in that particular API. So you give an extension like index. Okay, it's randomly you give an signature, API signature, and in this particular signature, if at all you are going to have that HTML page getting rendered, and that HTML page is not located in the client side, right, or else in the UI code, then it would actually say it through an error like 404. So 404 means page not found. Okay. And here in our case, the index is something we have not defined in our application. In our server, we haven't defined anything as index. So we have employee followed by employee ID as such, but we don't have anything with index. So this would actually return 404. Okay. So you can see, right? 404 not found. Okay. And you if you actually change the method here to post, and you are trying to access this one, so it's going to actually say like 404, because for this server, for this particular server, this is an endpoint or this is a route which is not defined, so which is not actually having any resource mapped. So here 404 it throws. Okay. So we are having another route employee to test. Probably we can test that and see if it's working. So we have an arrow object of type set. So what I'll be doing is like for every errors also I'll be actually stating out the reason and how to actually fix that error. So that's how like you can be seeing how to fix that error during your development. Okay. So this is because the object, right? This particular object is not serializable. So JSON serializable. So where the error comes is like you are trying to JSONify this particular data structure. And in Python, this data structure we might consider it to be an data dictionary, but it's not so. It's interpreted as a set. So for this to be a dictionary, you should have a key for this. So you can JSONify a dictionary data structure, not a set data structure. Okay. So now you actually get the response whatever we have. So similarly, so you can actually test it via Postman, or else also you can test it via an browser client. Okay, but browser client would be like more handy only if you have a get type of HTTP methods. For the post type of HTTP methods, you can't actually do, because post needs some data from you. Okay, additional input data from you. So when you say when you're going to do a post request, right? That means you are going to actually create an employee into your directory. So when you create an employee, you need to supply some details like the employee name or employee department or whatever. So in the browser client, you can't actually supply all those input details. You can just retrieve the data from the through the browser client, but you can't actually feed in some data to that. So for all these limitations, you need a specific API testing tool in form of Postman. Okay, so here you can actually post it or do all kind of HTTP methods here. Okay, so any questions? I'll take again pass here and be open for questions here before we
Yes.
dive into the business logic here.
Okay, Yasin is asking, what's the best way to protect a Flask APIs from common attacks like SQL injection, CSRF, and XSS?
Okay. So SQL injections mainly happens when does SQL injections happen? That's the scenario what we have to actually look for. This particular SQL injection can be like vulnerable when you expose your SQL queries. Okay, so SQL queries in the sense in your code you write your raw queries. Okay, and there can be more possibilities. Instead of the actual data, say for example, that's a simple query. Select start from employee where my employee ID equal to and particular ID. Okay. So here this is a raw query, raw SQL query, and this is vulnerable to an injection, possible injection, because this particular employee ID, instead of employee ID, this SQL query can be manipulated to also use probably like where department equal to so and so, right? So this SQL queries can be manipulated if at all there is an access for a code for the end user. So for all these use case to actually overcome this SQL injection, Python as an unique Pythonic way to do it is adapting SQL alchemy. So SQL alchemy is an ORMs. Okay, so ORMs is in Python in specific everything is an object. So you define an application, a Flask application. Now this particular app is an object, and now if at all you are going to define something like okay, maybe project equal to app. Okay, so this project is again going to be an object for this. So it's not going to be a variable, it's going to be an object. Why it's not a variable? Because while you actually create something, if this particular app has its own memory allocation. So your app is defined for the first time in line number 4. Okay. So that means the memory is allocated here. And this memory allocation, while you actually define it to another variable called project, you are not actually copying everything directly into the project variable. That means you are not assigning a specific memory for this project. You are rather actually making this project variable to refer to this app object. Okay, so that's how Python works. So since everything is treated as objects in Python, it's better to actually integrate any particular database as a SQL alchemy queries. Okay, instead of maybe like instead of writing the raw queries, raw SQL queries, try to put it as a SQL alchemy. So in SQL alchemy, there will be very
Okay.
less possibility where injections can happen or injections can happen or the SQL changes can it's better if you go with any ORMs. So SQL Alchemy is a package in Python where we use ORMs. So it differs actually based on framework. So would that answer your question?
Okay, okay.
Any other question?
Yes, yes, we have so many questions actually. Difference between put and patch.
Okay. So put and patch, right? Probably we don't use patch for many business logics. We do use patch, on a theoretical way, right? Since we don't use it practically much. So if you're going to update an employee here, you need to and all that particular employee for an employee record, you are going to gather all the details like the name, salary, and the department as well as the email ID. So you are going to actually have a record for an employee with all these details. If at all you are going to actually update that particular employee email ID alone, what put requires is like to again supply all these details. Okay, you need to supply name, you need to supply email ID, you need to supply department also. So because put expects all the records. Whereas patch, if at all you are going to change the department, it requires only that thing. So so that is the context why we use put and patch. But in patch, it won't be used in many production environment because the user won't be knowing, okay, I am going to update only the department or I'm going to update only the name, right? Update only the email ID because the server has to understand whatever the user passes, the data passes. So put is actually globally followed and patch. We don't specifically use it for most of the production environments there.
Okay. Another question is how caching handle in REST APIs.
Okay. Probably like I can actually explain while we do it a database integration, but maybe like on a higher level, I'll be doing it. So caching is nothing but writing your data to a database. Okay, so it's just leave the caching mechanism and everything there. The mechanism is going to be like writing your data to your database. Anyhow, you are going to actually maintain all your data in a database. Okay. So why you need cache is like cache is an in-memory database. Okay. So whereas your actual database is going to be like database is going to be hosted on a specific server, whereas this caching database is going to be hosted in your memory. So when it's in your memory, the access the read access or a write access is going to be like much faster than. So that's the main advantage of using caching. And all the APIs you can have caching for that. And mostly we do caching based on the algorithms. So what data we needs to be cached, everything that needs to be like discussed based on the specification and requirements.
Okay. What are some best practices for securing Flask based REST APIs, authentication, rate limitation, etc.?
Okay, for security is another maybe like another vital thing when we need to go with uh, concurrent user base or an multiple user base, right? So security needs to be considered, and for that we can actually use many decorators to authentication decorators. What we actually write it to this particular endpoint. So Azim are going to actually take care of an functionality like accepting the user login credentials, and you are going to generate a token, and based on that token your endpoint has to be accessed. So all these you are writing as a function. Now that particular function, you have to decorate it with this particular API. So maybe like I just for example, okay, because we don't have that function in place. Say for that function name is like it's inside security file, and the function name is like login. So that needs to be decorated with your API, and that needs to be decorated with all the other APIs that need the security access to. Yeah, anything else? Any other questions?
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So can we discuss the mostly used API authentication with Flask?
Okay. API authentication, we use OAuth probably, and we can't directly use OAuth is a protocol in specific, and we can't directly use the protocol. So we use OIDC. OIDC is a package, Flask package to connect with that OAuth protocol. So OIDC is the Open ID Connect. So it on accepting the login credentials, it actually generates a session token. So Flask OIDC is one such package where you can use it with Flask.
Okay. Another question. After installing Python and Flask on our machine, are they updated automatically? If not, how can we enable automatic updates?
Automatic updates. You can't update any packages which you actually installed, because you tell that particular package has to be in that version, right? If at all you can see in the requirements.txt, in this requirements.txt, you are given versions, okay? So always, right, until you come again and change the version, this particular version remains active. You can't update the version, or it's not like update, it's automatically updated. So it's a static version, and in case you need update, you have to come and update that one. So
Okay.
that all these are like one cons of Python. Okay, so Python is more version, since it's like having huge number of libraries. It's version specific, and all the versions has to be keep on maintained. Okay, so you can't directly update a version. Say for example, you can't update a Flask version. So this day it's 3.x, and you come a year after, and that day the latest version is 4. You can't update it directly, because that particular Python version, Flask package version should be compatible with your Python package version. So the versions compatibility has to be taken care of by the developer.
Okay. Okay. Another question is, please confirm the version of Flask and Python version that you are using now.
Okay, probably like so to get the Python version, right? So we are using 3.10. Okay, this is our Python version, and these are the packages. The Flask version is 3.1.1. And you can see just we installed Flask, but we have many other packages too, right? Because Flask by itself, it needs all these packages for it. So these are called as the dependence packages. So it all needs its dependencies. So Flask version is 3.1.1, and Python version is 3.10.0.
Okay, okay. Another question. Can you explain how Flask handle request validation and error handling in RESTful way?
Okay, probably these questions, right? We'll be actually doing the business logic, and we'll actually integrate as part of that. Okay, so that it would be more explanatory.
Okay, okay. Then we have actually so many questions. Let's take them after some time.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So these so we'll next move on to the next part of our application development. It's database integration. So as we agreed, we are going with the in-memory database for today. So because we don't want that configuring a separate database server bottlenecks for now. So we'll be going with an in-memory DB. So this particular in-memory DB will be using SQLite 3. So for this, we need to import SQLite 3. This is another package that comes and we have to actually define the SQLite 3 file. So here we would be actually defining the database file because all our data schemas like the columns what we do and the indexing what the column and the tables within the tables and the columns within that everything would be like inside this database file here. So we don't need a database integration for this one, but we need for all the other routes here, right? So first, we need to create a connection from our Flask application to our database, whatever we define. So for that, we'll have a unique function to capture the connection. So we are having a function here to create the connection. So you need to actually create a cursor for that. So So you have the database file, but you don't have the table created, right? So for that, first we'll go on to create a table here. So assume like you guys might have an at least a fundamental knowledge on SQLs. Okay, so I'll be going with SQL queries, writing SQL queries. So these are the just the general SQL queries. Probably like this is not Python specific, and so you'll be actually defining the columns of what are and all needed for this table employee. So ID is one column and name we are going to have and department and the email. So we set the columns, but we have to say like what data structures needs to be there for each of the columns. So the data type for this column is integer, and for this one we say it as text, and for this one it's text again, and this one also we can take it as text. And additional definitions you need to give for each of the columns. Okay, so like the ID is going to be the primary key for this one. And it's going to be like auto incremented. So I am not going to take care of while adding, I am not going to take care of the IDs. By itself is going to auto increment the ID number. And name we have to give not null because you can't expect a null because the user or the API can't come without a name object. Okay, and this has to be not null, and this particular thing also has to be not null, and along with this email has to be unique. So unique in the sense we maintain the case. So unique in the sense if two names, right? Some of them are having Akash and Akash, so they will be actually having their names common as Akash, but email IDs can't be the same. So that has to be unique, maybe like so that I'll be explaining the data validation, how it should be working. So this is how we actually create a table. And now once we create a table, and it's always important we commit all our executions. Okay, without committing, it won't go into the database. It won't actually make an impact on the table. So this commit is necessary if at all we are going to do any impactful transactions like add, inserting, updating, or deleting. Okay. For get or select, we don't need this commit. Probably just I'll take a break for a minute in between, Preeti, and I'll just come back.
Till then, we have one session feedback form, guys, and I would like to request you all to fill it. Please do fill it out. And if you guys have any question, please write it down in a Q&A tab. Guys, please fill it out.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry for that break in between.
No worries.
Well, I see many questions on the chat. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on. Resume from you. Okay. So we have created a DB here, and so now our application has to actually take care of creating the DB, right? So we'll include this function before we run this application. So we'll stop this server and we'll rerun it again. Okay. So now you can actually, it's not it. Okay. So we will move on to the first transaction. How are we going to actually probably like we'll try to do with add employee. Okay. First, we need to add an detail to actually retrieve it later. So to add an employee, it's just the again another SQL what we are going to use, and so for adding an employee, we don't need an employee ID because employee ID is going to be created by default and auto increment. Okay, so the API request is going to be getting a JSON as a payload. So what we call it as a payload for any add or the post or put APIs, right? What we call it as a payload. So we have to define our payload, and we'll be using this particular plugin, request plugin, to actually get our payload from the user. So we need to again import this plugin here. So this is our payload, and maybe like I'll for this particular post employee alone, I'll show you how the payload gets interpreted inside this function. Okay, and for the put, I'll be directly doing the business logic. So I'm going to print this payload just to show you what is a payload. Okay. So you have this employee endpoint defined in the Postman, and to supply this payload, you need to actually go and supply the body of this one now. So you choose raw, and mine is going to be an JSON data. So JSON data. So JSON data is nothing but the dict. Okay, so it expects name. And keep it as Arun. It expects the email. It expects department. JSON should always be in double quoted strings, okay? So just have that in mind. Both the key and the value should always be in double quoted, double quotes. So you are trying to actually send this, make sure our application is running. Yeah, its server is running. So you have a syntax error. Also, probably like uh, this you can actually track it in. This is how you track something with Python. If someone is new to Python, you get the actual error here, and the trace back for this goes from where this error occurred and in which file or which module this been occurred, and you can see the file here. So for us, the cursor.execute is something like where our error has occurred, and we'll actually see what the error is in specific. Okay. So here, this particular create table name, right? So we say it as like for the auto increment, this is a separate entity. That means this is a separate column, and this is a separate column. This is all comma separated, whereas this is not. So this is a typo error. What we actually do? So we have to again rerun it. So if you remember this one, object of type set is not JSON serializable. So what we would have done is like, so our return one, probably like here the return one is there. So this is not a dictionary. So this is a set. So we have to actually make it as a dictionary. So here you can see employee adder, and here you can see the payload what we have. So since we have put a print statement right here, it prints the payload on the console. So this is going to be our payload. Okay. So what we are going to do now is like just directly write this payload, insert this payload, grab the details from this payload and insert it into the table employee. So for this, we need to actually get the cursor, because cursor is the with cursor only we can execute all the SQL queries here. So since we are going to use cursor in all the rows, we are going to get the cursor as a separate module. Okay. So we are just having the cursor as a separate module here, and with this particular cursor, so this cursor, all this belongs to SQLite 3 package. Okay, so and also like since we are going to deal with cursor factory. Probably like what we'll be doing is like we'll also import for a better data formatting. We'll be actually adding also this attribute row factory so that all the rows in the table would be actually considered as the row in the rows format itself. Otherwise, the data type we have to explicitly change. So here we will be inside every route, we'll be getting this cursor. And we'll be trying to actually run this cursor, using cursor, we'll try to run the SQL query. So, probably like, as someone asked, right, for SQL injection. So the better way is, right, not to use the raw SQL queries since it's a POC, I'm using it now. So here you can actually use the SQL alchemy ORM concept so that you can directly use ORM functions to add the data, whatever you are interested in. Okay. Employee, right? The table. So employee. So you have the payload here. So see that you maintain the order, name, email, and department, right? So okay, okay, fine. So here we execute this command. Also, this as I said before, you will be just executing this command if you are just using cursor dot execute. For this to actually impact on your table, you need to always use the cursor dot commit. Okay. So let's see if this is working on the same one. So here you can see so in most of the errors, right? It would be operational errors if at all you are doing something with your database transactions or queries, if you are making some faults with that. So having actually debug equal to true gives you the actual error, but on the production environment, since our debug flag would be false, you can't be actually showing this environment to an end user, okay, because end user doesn't want these error details. They just want to know if it's working or not. That's how the uh, uh, applications being built. So to get the actual error in detail, you will be knowing here. So it's incomplete here input, so that means we have missed something in our query. I missed. So maybe like as part of the development, if at all you are missing something in a query, what you can do is like you can take this query and directly work it on your workbench or SQL workbench. So in SQL workbench, you will be actually knowing what has been missed there, right? So what particular maybe like what particular if at all you are going to supply some values and see what is something you have missed in your syntax there. So this what we see is in this is like syntax error what we see. So here probably like we'll try to address this syntax error, or else like we'll first complete all the other endpoints and come back to this in the interest of time. Okay, so connection says like the comment is not properly done. Okay, so this is where I missed it. So if you can see here, we are using con.commit, right? And here it's actually cursor, what we are trying to return it. So this should be con. You can see the employee added here. So now the employee is added. And how we can actually retrieve this employee details is like once an employee, so for the better maybe like understanding, we will be adding two more employees here. Okay, so we have added two employees to this table now, and probably to retrieve this employees. So an API way of retrieving it would be like get using get, right? So we have two get, right? So one is to get all the employees, and another one is to get uh, employee with a particular employee ID. So to get all these employees, probably like what we will be doing is the same way using the select. So for for get details, right? You don't have any payload. Okay, so we won't be giving any JSON input for that. So it's always like you just get is something like what you have, you just retrieve it, right? In case you need some filter, okay, I need only this particular employee details. You just supply that employee ID alone. So here, if you see, to get that particular employee ID details, we supply through the signature, not through the payload. Okay, so this particular difference you need to get. There are like multiple parameters how you can pass for an API. So one is through a path parameter and another one is as a request payload parameter. So path parameter in the sense like you can actually use it the in the API path itself, you will be passing as a path parameter. And request parameter is like the payload what we given for the add employee, right? So this is how we do it. And so for the get one, we'll be again implementing cursor dot execute select, right? Okay. So, so this is just a normal query what we do in SQL. So the Python, how it would interpret it as an query object. So from the query object, if at all you are going to get maybe like from the query object, you are going to actually get the actual employee details, right? For that, you need to actually iterate that particular query object. So again, we are going to convert the output as a dictionary. What and all we have, what and all we get from the select query. So probably like employee we will be doing. Employee. So now we again probably like I'll save this request in Postman, and we'll create a new request for get. So for this get, as I said, it doesn't expect any payload parameter. You don't need this body. Just make sure you are giving the signature properly. Okay. So the signature is just employee and get, right? So, so again, you have an error while actually maybe like expects X doing this as a JSON. Okay, so for this one, what you can do. Probably like as I debug, we'll take any questions if they are open.
Yes. Okay. Is Fast API and Postman API are same, or is Fast API is used as a tool in Postman API?
Okay, so leave it fast API or Flask. So probably like Postman API is just another API what we are using. Okay, so it's not something related with Flask API or Flask, so Fast API or Flask. So any APIs, REST API you do, you can test it with Postman. So Postman doesn't actually is not a separate framework for using the maybe like Postman is not a separate framework for creating the APIs. Is just a tool to test the API what you have.
Okay. Another question. What what profiling tool can help identify bottlenecks in a Flask REST API?
Okay, so maybe like you can use a tool for that, or else like even Postman actually like can be used as an automated tool to actually identify the bottlenecks when you execute all the APIs. Assume like you are going to get 100 API requests at the same time, right? So is your application quite enough to handle all that 100 API requests? All those can be actually simulated using Postman. So you can create 100 API requests using Postman itself when you use it as an automated tool.
Okay. How can we handle API versioning gracefully in Flask?
So API versioning, how we used to do is like, so for the better way, we will be actually, so what we are doing is the prototype, right? So better way while we define the signature, we will be actually defining it with the versions actually like V1 and V2 as and when we actually upgrade our API versions. So all the API signatures would be starting with this particular version. So this is a common practice what industry actually prefers, having the version defined in the API itself.
Okay. Another question. How to structure our code? We are now going to put everything in one file, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, how to structure the code in the sense like you have this database helper functions, right? It's like to get the cursors and probably like this cursor method and to create the DB, everything is you can actually segregate out. You can have a DB helper function for that. You can have a APIs .py file for that, and models.py to actually like write the queries and from there you can actually read it. So it's all like you have a file for the persistent functionality, you have a file for API endpoints, and for database you have a separate file.
Okay. Okay. Another question. How do we achieve debugging logging in production environment? Are there any particular tool or techniques to do this without exposing the sensitive information?
Okay, so logging, right? So logging the maybe like you have a tool. So if at all you are using cloud-wise deployments, right? So you are going to deploy this one on not on your local machine or not on any particular in-premise server. You are going to deploy it in a cloud like EC2 instance or a Lambda. Then by default it gives you a logging service called CloudWatch, or else you can also use Python's own logging import logging module for this one.
Okay. Okay. Sujil is asking. Uh, Actually, what I'm asking is our product will be big, so it will be messy to code everything here in one file. So, how to make root for each module?
Okay, so road for each module in the sense if I take your question right. Assume like you are going to have an employee service here, and also you are going to have maybe like a department service. So department service would have separate routes for that, and employee service would have separate routes for that. And now you have to combine all the maybe like all the application routes within your project on a common urls.py file. So in the url.py file, you have to add this route with that. You have to add the version route with your application routes, specific application routes. So now you have your app one folder, app two folder, and on the same folder level, you will be having your route, the main routes.py folder there. So this is like works when you are going with microservice architecture, when you create API gateway kind of stuff there.
Okay, thank you. Krishna is asking, is Flask act as web server like IIS?
Web server like IIS. Yeah, Flask, right? Maybe like in this particular server itself, you can see here. I just show it in first. I'll rerun it again for you. So you can see here, right? Use a production WSGI server. That means it Flask doesn't have a web server by inbuilt. So you need to actually have your web server like Nginx or Apache Tomcat, whatever you prefer, and you have to integrate that with this application through an application server gateway. Like we used to have Geonicorn. Mostly for Python, we used to prefer Geonicorn. So all those you can do. Whereas in Fast API, there is an inbuilt application server gateway. Geonicorn is there inbuilt. So that's one another reason why you prefer Fast API rather than Flask.
Okay. Another question. Can you explain why do we use Flask, the purpose, and how it is related to REST API?
Okay, so Flask, as I said, it's not like you can do REST API only with Flask. You can do REST API even with Java and its own framework like Spring Boot and whatever, Hibernate, whatever. And in Python itself, you can do REST API with Django, Flask, and Fast API. So here we used Flask because whenever you are going to actually like in production, right, everything is in microservices. Okay, so no one is these days no one are using a monolithic app that is like a single application to run your complete Zomato application or your Amazon application. They are actually breaking down all the services into microservice. Like your order will go into a separate application, your profile will go into a separate application, your payment would be taken care by a separate service. So for all these services, we will be actually using a micro framework because that makes the maintenance and the admin works more easier, the management more easier for them. So one such framework is Flask, and so we adapt this particular micro framework for that.
Okay. Another question. Can we use REST API in Drupal framework? How to integrate?
Yeah, so you can actually use it. So maybe like I'm not sure if there is any separate package which extends that particular REST function for the framework, but you can actually use that's feasible. So as I said, all the frameworks since REST API is an foundation API, okay. There are many other APIs like WebSocket, okay. So have you guys ever think? How an Hotstar streaming always keeps on streaming, or maybe like on clicking the video, how the video keeps on streaming. So for that, there is a separate API that's a WebSocket API. So that's more deviated from the REST standard. So all the API supports everything, whereas REST API is the foundation API to develop any web application. So it's supported all. It's been supported by all the frameworks.
Okay. Sujil is asking, what kind of Flask projects is good for our resume? Like how to make good backend project without using front end.
Okay, so maybe like if at all you are looking for a resume perspective, right? Make sure you touch most of the features that a backend application needs. Okay, I would say as a features, the authentication features is one such feature. Then the actually like the user login that comes with authentication and authorization is one such feature, like who can access which are feature, who can add an employee. Not everyone can add an employee, only an admin person can add an employee. So authentication, authorization is one such one, and the data validation and the error handling, all that needs to be taken care along with Flask. And try to host it in any open source, maybe like open source servers, cloud servers. AWS can give you an open source endpoint. Lower case of application, maybe like not a scalable one, a minimized version or a micro lightweight application can be hosted there. So you can have that in your resume.
Okay, okay. Yokesh, can we share this project with the audience?
Probably, maybe I'll be sharing this. Not an issue there. For this setup, I don't have the Git repo connected. I'll share it to you. Not an issue then. Okay.
Okay, 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 guys. He will share it with me, and if you guys want this project, you can message us. We'll share,
Okay.
or
So yeah,
they
go ahead.
can directly reach out to you for the
Yeah, I can actually send you the zipped version, okay, with all
great,
the libraries, everything. So
great,
I'll be actually sharing you my email ID, and in that you can actually like drop a mail, DM me. Just I'll share you the zipped version of whatever we do now. Okay.
great.
So we'll continue here, and we try to actually retrieve the employee we just added. And so as of now, we have this much employee in our table, and we'll continue coding for getting the employee with respect to the maybe like with respect to the ID as well. Okay, so it lies the same. The implementation remains the same. You don't need an employee list here. So again, for getting a particular employee, we are writing a SQL query where we are going to pass this employee ID to this particular maybe like query. So here with this one, we would be trying to get only one instance, okay, because ID is the primary key. So we'll be getting only one instance. So we don't use to want to use fetch out. Instead, we would be using fetch one for this. Okay, so fetch one won't be giving you a query object, all of the query objects, so which you want to actually iterate. So it would be actually giving you a query object, maybe like only that particular object, what we are trying to actually do. So there we are trying to. So we have these two maybe like two details in our table. So we'll try to get the second ID's detail alone. Okay. So make sure our signature is right. see. So since we are running on a local machine, right? Our server won't be much interactive. When I say interactive, whenever a request is being sent, the server is not identifying at immediate, right? You can see here, I have to actually invoke this server again and again. So for all these purposes only, you need an application server gateway. So that would be like using an inbuilt polling mechanism. And that would actually like on a request process, it would actually accept that request and processes with that response. So that's the difference between using an development server and then production application and web server. So our maybe like our select get methods works. So this is with the post and the get method what we have. So since we have like limited time, I'll also integrate how we are going to actually have a data validation and also like error handling. Okay. So data validation and error handling is must before for any endpoints because and these endpoints may be like used from anywhere, be it like UI client or a Postman client. So there can be an chances that any endpoint can be given which is not there in application. So for that we have to integrate data validation and also like have a proper error validation. You can't actually give an error whatever the debug flag uses, right? So for that, first we'll be taking care of the data validation. So probably here we'll be actually seeing. So what we need to do is like if the JSON doesn't have name, email, or department, those three are mandatory. If the JSON doesn't have any one particular attribute, we'll be throwing an error like this particular data is being missed. Okay, and we'll actually send another error code. So by default, the error code is 200. We will be sending another error code. So it's just like a normal implementation what we do, if not payload. I'm going to write it like I'm going to return my function. So I'm going to send an maybe like I'm going to send an a response code by default. Like if this is actually failing, so by default it gives 200. So I'm going to inject a response code since I have this error interpreted here. Okay, we'll try to run this one. So for post employee, I'm going to remove the. So you can see 400 bad request and missing mandatory payload argument, which is the custom exception what we are given. So this is one way how we actually validate the data. So this particular data validation in Flask, you have to take care. Whereas in Fast API, since that's an advanced version, you have another package called Pydantic that takes care of this particular data validation. So if the name is not given by itself, it actually throws an error like that is mandatory and you have to supply that attribute. So you don't need to actually have this if check here. So this is how data is validated for the post and the put. And you can also validate in Git. Say for example, if employee ID, right? If they are giving some strings as an employee ID, you can actually validate by converting it to an integer. And if it's not converted, if it's not getting converted, then you can throw an exception there, like it's always expecting a string employee ID. So this is all like custom data validations what we have in Flask. So any queries on data validation here?
Actually, we have lots of questions.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Preeti. We'll take some 5 questions here.
Okay, okay, okay. So, okay. Can Flask APIs be designed to support both REST and GraphQL endpoint in the same project? If so, what are the trade-offs?
Okay, so yeah, Flask or any framework, it would support REST as well as like GraphQL as well as WebSocket and as well as SOAP API, whatever. So all the APIs would be supported by any framework. So assume this is the use case, okay? So you go to an or store app again, and you are going on to maybe like movies, okay? So this maybe like movies. So to get the details of the movies, on clicking that, it would send an REST API request. And when you click that particular movie which you are interested in, to stream that movie, you would be actually it would be going and requesting that WebSocket API. So now for this particular use case itself, we have addressed two APIs. So all the GraphQL, everything, what all the APIs, a framework should be supported, and all the Python frameworks, the major frameworks like Django, Flask, Fast API will support everything.
Another question, is there any built-in in ORM in Flask?
Yeah, we do have Flask SQL Alchemy is one such built-in, but we won't be advising to use a built-in ORMs for that particular framework alone. Okay, so assume maybe like in your project you are working with Flask now, and your project get expanded, and you need to actually move it to Fast API or Django. So at that time, it would be like tedious if at all you are going to adapt framework-oriented ORM. So for these use cases, you can have a ORM which is used across multiple frameworks. So only SQL Alchemy, just SQL Alchemy can be supported across multiple frameworks. Whereas Flask SQL Alchemy is only other to that particular Flask framework.
Okay. Another question. Can you explain on CORS?
Okay, so cause, right? Cause mostly like comes into picture when you are going to integrate this APIs with a UI client. Okay, so browser client, not in UI. We'll take it as a browser client. Okay, so because browser expect a cross origin resource, okay? So cross origin resource in the sense you are going to actually call that API from multiple. So like this Python code setup in backend, you will be having a React JS code setup in front end too. And that React code JS would consume multiple APIs at different places, okay? So all these APIs would be used at different places. So this response would be scattered maybe like across multiple pages in the front end perspective. So for one response shouldn't be going into the another screen on another correlate with another response. You need this cause to allow. So the cause actually allows this particular restricts this cross origin forgery there, and it actually keeps that response stick to only that particular request. So this comes into picture when we are integrating with a UI client. For a Postman kind of testing tool client, we don't need this cost there.
Okay, another question. Actually, we are using raw queries in SQL Alchemy right now, but I have seen some ORMs in PHP which are very useful to write queries. So, is
Yeah.
there any similar thing in Flask slash Python?
Yeah, so SQL Alchemy is one such. So you don't want to use raw queries itself. So you will be directly writing ORMs. So ORMs in the sense you can actually like say if at all I want to replace this with ORMs, ORM query alone. Okay, because ORM I can't replace because you need SQLite for that need to connect with that ORMs and you need to create an engine for that ORM. So the configuration would be like quite deviated how we configured here. So the select query in ORM would be pretty similar, just the way like the employee what we define here should be sticking to a model. Okay, so all the ORM need a model. So you need to create a model.py and you need to define a model for that. Inside the model, you have to create a class like class employee, and you have to have various fields like name, maybe like name or email and department fields, and you have to define the data type for that. So it's like class and objects. So whoever is more comfortable with OOPS concepts, they can actually like handle ORMs more, and since ORMs are more scalable too and it also avoids the vulnerability of SQL injection and getting the SQL queries changed in between. So ORMs are like more effective when we use it on real time. So Python, to answer your question, Python also has an SQL ORM. SQL Alchemy is an ORM, and if you're going with Django specific one, Django ORM by default it has one.
Okay, okay, thank you. Another question. Difference between gRPC based and REST API. More about stateless means.
Okay, so gRPC, right? It's more on maybe like remote protocols, I would say. Assume like hmm, what example in the sense Google Drive would be a better example. So Google Drive, when two of your peers, right, going to edit on the same document, right? You are editing on a document, and the same peer sitting on another location can also edit on a same document. That's because remote protocol connection has been established. It's a peer-to-peer connection. It's not an server connection here. It's a server connection in API. You can always you give a request in Postman, you give a request, it gets connected to a server. Whereas in GPRC, it connects to peer. A server doesn't have that particular scope. So document, it directly connects to the document bypassing the server. So that the stateless comes into picture because each peer has own credentials, right? So the sessioning, all that are important. Whereas here, the stateless is like each of the APIs needs to give their own sessioning. The session token has to be sent to each one API so that we authenticate. We actually decorate each API with the authentication flags here.
Okay. Another question. Can you show the app running in the browser to add get methods?
Okay. Uh, to add Git methods, probably like I'm not sure what you are expecting. If this is our maybe like if this is our employee get employee API call, and this would be our return type as of now because we just return a raw JSON, right? So this particular JSON would be like passed from the front end with an HTML and so on. So the main idea of using a JSON is like not directly use it in a browser. So a browser code is being handled by a separate front end service, and that front end consumes this JSON response for their use case.
Okay.
Okay, maybe like we have a little bit of a concept, one more concept to cover. We'll cover that one too, and also we'll take the another questions and sign off. Okay. So we have done with data validation and the error handling, which is more like which is an important thing while we actually consider doing any API calls, because you itself saw like we faced multiple errors, and the errors was not like such meaningful for an end user to actually read, so right. So for that we need to actually do some error handling. So this particular error handling comes like uh, you are trying to give an employee ID which doesn't actually exist in the database, right? And they has to actually give an valid error for that one. So for that case, probably like what you can do is like here you can again introduce one uh, if condition to state if I am not getting any employee, if not if I am not getting any. Hello. Okay, probably like which is not there. Okay, we'll continue. So if the employee doesn't exist, right, we have to again return a meaningful error for this one. So again, we take the JSONify, and the message here is like employee doesn't exist. And we maybe like we can give a 404 for this case because we don't have such employee. Okay. Two gives us this one, employee ID with 3. Okay, the employee ID with 3 doesn't exist. So there is no employee. So we are trying to actually catch this instead of leaving a none flag, right? So with none flag, the user won't be knowing if the employee is there or not. So this one is one way of error handling, and the normal error handling what we use it. Okay. So while we actually try to add an employee. So this is the place where we try to add. So we have an try here, and we will be having an except flag for this one. Okay, saying like probably, yeah. So we'll try to inject an error and see if at all we are going to get this one. And before all this, right, I missed one thing. Like since we are committing always, we are doing always a commit. It's always better to actually close the cursor. Okay, so whenever we are after committing, doing a commit, it's a best practice to close the cursor. So, okay, so this gives us a data validity error. So this so here the employee is added, and we'll try to actually see if we really. So there is no such. So there is no such. There is no route. So that is showing as 404. So we'll see if our route signature is right to get the. So here we are having three records, whatever now added. So what we'll try to do is like again add an email, the same email which is already added. Okay, so so you can see it's you can't allow duplicates in an email because we have set it to an unique flag here. Yeah. So while defining the email column, we have set it to an unique flag here. So you can't have the same email added. So it's actually throwing an error like error occurred while adding an employee. So this is how actually you handle any errors within API. So you can either handle with normal if and else, or else like you can handle with try, except, and finally whatever. So this is the normal way how you handle try and except is normal way how you handle errors in Python, irrespective of any applications. Okay. Yeah, so update is again like the same update query which we use directly, and probably like okay, one asked difference between update, sorry, put and patch, right? So for them, we'll actually try to have one with update. Okay. So your update also requires an employee ID. So it's just the normal query. We write employee update, and here. So in update flag, the main thing is like we just give the employee ID. So we won't be having the idea what the user wants to update really. Are they going to update the name or the email or the department? So for that, the best practice is like we need to actually set everything, whatever we are actually having, going to get it from the user, right? So name we are having, and email, and the department too. So by this, you can actually make sure like we are not sticking only to one particular attribute which we are interested in updating. Whatever the user gives, everything gets updated in. So for the placeholders, we have to give. So here we have to expect a payload because the payload carries the details to update the whatever the update details are there. So once you make any impactful transaction like update or delete or insert, you need to give commit. And the better practice is to close the commit or close the cursor. So here again, this has to be indeed, and we can give an okay by default. However, it would come as 200. So now we see if this works. So what we'll try to create another request here. Yes. We'll copy the endpoint. And for the third, we'll update this one. We copy the body. So for the put and post, the payload is essential. So here we'll update it as so here again what happens is like the unique constraint failed because that it's already an common email ID, right? So you can't actually have two common ones there. So what we have to try to do is like okay, so here the database is logged because the cursor actually executed that one and it has not been released now. So this is something like you would frequently see while you are doing a concurrent application, that is a scalable applications in threading, as well as like if at all you are not going to close your cursors there. Okay, as I debug, I think we can take some questions here. Riti? Hello.
Yes,
Yeah, any more questions?
yeah, actually we have.
Yeah.
Okay, so CORS is generally getting response from multiple APIs for our requests. Is it is it my understanding is correct? So can you tell one example when course error occur?
Okay, so maybe like an example in the sense you have an API. Okay, so in for an e-commerce app, you have an API to list the products. Okay, so to list the products, you are calling the same API, and also again somewhere in the other screen you are going to call the same API while the first API is being processed. So, but this particular first API is getting processed on a separate screen. So this particular separate screen, in the sense separate, maybe like in the front end, everything is actually a single page, but they used to say it as a component wise on the separate component. Okay, so when these two components are going to correlate, and when your same API is going to actually uh, get processing the request, at that time the cause error would occur actually. If at all you are not going to allow origin. The
Okay, another question. What tools can generate interactive API docs like Swagger slash OpenAI from Flask rules?
Mm, so with Flask itself, you can actually do it. So there is a package for that. You can actually integrate Swagger docs for that. So if I am not wrong, the package name is Flask RESTful. So the package would be like that. And this one in Fast API, by inbuilt, you will be getting the Swagger docs.
Okay.
So
Another.
for all these Swagger docs, you need to actually have the doc strings defined actually. So doc strings in the sense, so inside this, right, you need to actually have the string to define your API, what the params it would accept, what is the payload it would accept, and what is the method it is there. So from there only the Swagger docs would be constructed. So without this, you can't construct these Swagger docs.
Okay,
Yeah.
can we move to another question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. How REST API help remote professionals?
Remote professionals. Yeah, so see, most of the work in software engineering, right? It would comes like with respect to backend engineering and full stack engineering. So full stack engineering is limited to front end and back end, as well as like DevOps, everything. So and when you say the vast thing which has to be like known or which is being evolved, isn't backend engineering, because API is one such thing. You see like you will be actually defining, and you will a simple use case is updating the employees, right? So for past 2 3 years I have been not with writing the API. Okay, so API is like one time activity. You write the code for API, you say like this API should be like defined in this way, but the major work comes in like how do you optimize that API, how do you actually make that API performance a better. So for all that, you have to make your systems more aggressive, systems more robust, scalable. So all that comes with backend engineering, and all that actually surrounds around building your API. So you need to integrate pagination for that. So assume you are having like in your organization, you are going to have 10,000 employees, or if it's a TCS kind of organization, it's going to have like 1 lakh employees. So your select query won't be working in the same level for 1 lakh employees. Today you run this select through Postman, and you actually get it in 15 milliseconds, right? But for a 10,000 or 1 lakh employee, it won't be the same. Uh, it would be like taking in seconds range. So for all that, to optimize the performance, you need to implement pagination, you need to implement caching. So that's how you actually evolve the implemented API. So coding the API, it's not such a big deal actually. Just you need to actually like know what my API should know. Like improving the performance of that API, and maybe like including other features like authentication, authorization, and also like uploading some packages. So you for a post currently we are just doing an add employee, right? We are just passing a JSON. what you assume you are going to pass a file which is of size 10 GB to your post API. So on that case, 10 GB won't be parsed within a fraction time. It will be taking more seconds on that. So for all that, you need API optimization in place. So all that is about the backend engineering, and be it remote or be it in on-site or being you are connected to a particular employer. So that's not something restricted or limited to the API or a backend development. For a better application, you need to consider all these while you design and develop an API.
Okay. Another question. How do you architect a Flask-based REST API for microservices, especially when working with service discovery, API gateways, and inter-service communication?
Okay, so probably I have built over 4 5 production grade microservice architecture applications now. So most of the things what we would be actually taking care is the API gateway and the rate limits because API gateway is something like which brings all our service APIs at a single place. Okay, and this API gateway has to actually the design, the patterns for creating any REST APIs should always be taken care while we design our API gateway, because assume same e-commerce application. You are ordering something, you are adding to your cart, and you are doing a payment. All these are taken care by 3 microservices. Cart is a service, payment is a service, order is a service. What if your payment fails? That means you have to actually reserve that particular cart, unreserve that item from that cart, and also unreserve that item from that order. So how would your API communicate? How would your APIs, different APIs in your API gateway communicate? So for all these, you need to actually bring in a new concept of events. Kafka, if at all you have come across, Kafka is a tool which can actually take care of not only Kafka, there are multiple event-driven tools. So when you actually order API does its stuff, it actually gives an information to your event manager saying like the order has been placed. So based on that event acknowledgement, your next service, the card service, would be processing its own API request. So one card service request response is fulfilled, then the payment service comes into picture. So this is how the API gateway should be designed, and we call it as maybe item potency in terms of REST API. So there is a separate pattern what you can actually refer to, the Saga pattern, in terms of REST API, if at all you are keen interested in developing that kind of application. So that's all puts you in building a more robust and scalable application there.
Okay, let's take a last question. How REST API is different from GraphQL API?
Okay, so GraphQL, GraphQL is a standard what you actually do, and maybe GraphQL I need to explain. So GraphQL is always a persistent one. Okay, REST API is like you give a request, you get a response. That's it. The scope of the API is done. Whereas GraphQL is like always it's ever running. So maybe have you worked on Jupyter Lab kind of things in Python? So you have a kernel in Jupyter Lab, right? So that particular kernel is connected to a Python interpreter underneath. So that Python interpreter needs to be always in running. It can't be disconnected from that interpreter. The kernel can't be getting disconnected. So for those kind of and eventually all these kernels and this interpreter are embedded into an web application, that is your Jupyter Lab. So here the use case of GraphQL comes into place. So GraphQL makes your resource always live. So that's so where and all you need a live interaction. You can prefer using GraphQL kind of interfaces there.
Okay, we are done with the questions.
Yeah, probably like we are done with the time too, and so mostly I have covered all the concepts too, and so it was quite an interactive session with you guys. And in case you are having any such maybe future queries or queries regarding to backend engineering in specific or designing your applications, I'll be actually always open to support you or maybe like address your queries. And you can always reach me out. Probably I'll put my email ID here. Preeti, is that fine?
Yes, yes, completely fine.
Yeah, you can reach me at this email ID, and I'll be always open to answer your queries in terms of tech stack specific or domain specific, whatever. So I have expertise with automotive logistics as well as storage, and also like insights, everything with Python, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yukesh, for conducting this session and sharing your knowledge with us. We are really grateful for your time, and we are really thankful for the people who joined us today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this session, and if you guys like to revisit the session or share it with others, the recordings are also available on our LinkedIn page and YouTube channel. So until then, take care, stay curious, and keep learning. See you all next time. Once again, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you very much, Yogesh.
Yeah, thanks, Preeti,
Thank you.
and
Bye
thanks.
bye, take care. If you guys are not able to copy email, you can message us. I will we'll share it with you.